You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making it.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Inslee.
This is episode 463 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. On today's show, I'm covering the U.S. preparing to send more military aid to Ukraine. In Afghanistan, two people held competing presidential inaugurations, and the U.S. is considering providing more military support for Turkey's invasion of Syria. All right, everybody, I need you to share the show. You find it online at the Libertarian Institute. I am the news editor at the Libertarian Institute. I write the news roundup, and both the show and the roundup can be found on the homepage, libertarianinstitute.org. Make sure you subscribe to the show somewhere. It's on all kinds of podcast feeds. It's also on the Libertarian Institute all podcast feed, where you could get my show along with Scott Horton's show, Free Man Beyond the Wall, and several other great podcasts. Last, if you'd like to donate to the show, you could do that at patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus. So I'm starting off today's show by talking about the war at home. There's this really important issue we have going on, and it was covered by the director of the 10th Amendment Center, Michael Boldin, on his recent podcast. Now, I'll link to this in the show notes page. But what he says is that there's these halo body cameras that police wear, and apparently they're going to have live facial recognition ability. So I'll talk about the consequences of that after I talk about, I think, the irony of this situation where body cameras were supposed to be something that protected people against the police. And it looks like they're going to be turned around and used as a weapon against us, especially since, police had the ability a lot of times to switch on, off, or cover up their body cameras. And so if they are looking to do anything incriminating, well, it just so happened I had my hand over it. I didn't mean to, for whatever reason, I was in danger, so I put my hand there, or I was looking for this or that or the other thing, or they switch it on and off because of these reasons or the other reason. And I guess all the cops have figured out that there's apparently a 30-second recording delay when you switch it on and off. And so if you switch it off, it continues to record for 30 seconds or so. And so in Baltimore, this actually, I believe, busted two officers planting drugs. They switch out the body camera, they throw the drugs in the car. Well, the camera's still rolling because they couldn't even wait a couple seconds to do it. So things like that were, really helpful with body cameras. Now, I think, unfortunately, even before this facial recognition thing, there were a lot of devils within, having these body cameras, including the police kind of own and control the footage, at least in most places. There may be some places where some kind of civilian oversight board has the ability to release something, but generally it seems like the police do that, and then they could, release short, snippets of it to, give the impression they want to give, or just, not release incriminating or bad video for police overall. The other issue is that, people either don't watch or don't care. We do have some body camera video that is absolutely damning and graphic. I covered the murder of Daniel Shaver on the show probably a couple years ago now. But, there's body camera footage. There's, you seeing this man, drunkenly begged the police not to shoot him, and he was just trying to follow their conflicting orders until somebody shot him. One of the police officers got themselves worked up that they shot this guy who was just crawling on the ground like they told him to, and people see this video and they really don't demand justice. Either that or they just don't watch it and never get exposed to it. And so I guess as good as it is almost that footage exists, at the same time it really the officer is still free. I think at least at one point after this was even collecting some kind of monthly stipend after, leaving the police force for his mental health injuries he developed murdering them. So, there's a lot of negatives to that. Also, the problem here is that facial recognition software, I don't think it's that good. Michael Boldin on his show said it's pretty solid if you're a white man. And, maybe that's true. Maybe it's gotten a lot better. I had even read not too long ago that they're making like 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 errors. And so, if you're a white guy, there's an awful lot of us. And honestly, if a cop is walking around with a body camera with facial recognition, I don't like the 10% odds that or even 5% odds, that he mistakenly pits me out as a criminal. But, it really doesn't work well once you look at minorities and then especially, I think, female minorities. For whatever reason, I really haven't looked into it, so I don't know. I'm not really alleging a grand conspiracy here, but for whatever reason, they don't work as well on minorities, and it's going to lead to more misidentifications. I'd always talked about this article that I read where they ran facial recognition on some, I believe, black members. I think it was actually like the Black Caucus or something. And several of them, it triggered, that they were some kind of wanted felons. Now, there's a funny little joke there because they all should be wanted felons, but, that's not what this is showing. It's showing it's going to misidentify people. And so it's going to mean an awful lot of confrontation between police and innocent people, especially in minority communities. And of course, you have more police presence there to begin with. And so, more chances for conflict just because you have more police, plus the software is more likely, or the AI is more likely to mess up for a minority. And so even maybe if it's nobody's intention, using these programs is going to, have racist result. Maybe one positive out of body cameras. I don't know if it's the case in this particular situation that I'm going to mention, but one woman received $325,000 after being beaten by police. It was caught, I think it was in a store, so it may have been caught on the store camera, but it was caught by some kind of camera, and it shows all these terrible taser marks and everything. And she was just shoplifting. She didn't deserve that. And so maybe it does in some cases, help victims get justice, and being able to play that for a jury, maybe ups the settlement that they're able to receive. After a court ruling, I believe by the 9th Circuit Court, Trump is going to deploy an extra 160 active duty soldiers to the southern border. Some of these soldiers are military police along with engineers and medics. I believe they're going to border crossing areas near El Paso and San Diego. A new study has found that over the past 5 years, I think that's from 2015 to 19, U.S. weapons exports, have increased by 23% overall. So what we are exporting in 2015 has grown 23% to 2019, but the world share of the market has grown by 5% from 31 to 36. So, we are the merchants of death as Americans, Lockheed Martin representing us on the world stage, where, you look at the crazy situations. I should, throw Boeing, Raytheon, and others in the military-industrial complex, makers of weapons company. But all these countries, whether we're fighting against them or, they're now our allies or something like that, so many of them have American weapons, and there's so much proliferation of American weapons in the Middle East. You look in one sense that Iran still has American fighter jets within their air force, as one example. Another example is Jabhat al-Nusra, the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, continues to be, captured with American-made weapons like TOW missile. All right, onto this story about the U.S. looking to give more military aid to Ukraine. It seems that we have the Pentagon informally informing Congress that they plan to give this $125 million in aid to Ukraine. The aid's going to include radars and patrol boats. So it's not clear to me how soon that this aid would be transferred to Ukraine. 3 months, 6 months, a year, next week, maybe, I don't know. And what authorization and authorities, processes this has to go through to get passed. My guess is that it hits no conflict at all. And, that's because of the Russiagate narrative. I've talked about this on the show quite a few times, but I do think it's a really important to make on how effective Russiagate really was, and that Obama didn't like giving military aid to Ukraine. Now, I don't know, they may not classify this as lethal military aid, so this may be the same kind of stuff that Obama was transferring to them, but this is, an additional, we're giving lethal aid, we're giving the non-lethal aid, now we're giving even more, 125 million more to Ukraine. So a step further than what you saw in the Obama administration. And this is a time where tensions in Ukraine are relatively low. You have a situation in Ukraine, to briefly describe the civil war, most of the country controlled by the government in Kiev. There's a region in the far east of the country that has a majority Russian population. And in 2014, after a coup orchestrated by the United States, a government took over that targeted the Russian people of the country, making Russian not an official language. So the people of that region rebelled. They received support from Russia as the U.S. orchestrated the coup and backed the government of Ukraine. 10,000 people died fairly quickly in this war, and we've had a several-year-long loose ceasefire condition where sniper fire and shelling goes on along the front lines. They really don't change at all. People do die. I have no idea what the numbers are for the past year or something, but people are continuing to die from this conflict in Ukraine. However, things may have begun a little bit better. There's been a president in Ukraine for the past 2 years now by the name of Zelensky, who wrote in on, I guess you would call, a populist message. He at one time is just a TV guy who plays Mr. Smith Goes to Washington in a TV series. And I think it was a little bit kind of a feel-good comedy type series sitcom, and then replicates that actually in Ukraine. And so that kind of leadership provided the room for serious talks with Putin. And while this hasn't materialized into much yet, there have been prisoner swaps and four-party talks with France and Germany included. The overall point being, that's the political situation in Ukraine as the United States is assigned to pour more military aid into the country. As I said, this will likely be passed by Congress, although it seems like with everybody in hysterics about the coronavirus and the Democratic primary going on, promising trillions of dollars in entitlements for healthcare, Social Security, free tuition, that, they'd be looking at the budget any place they can to trim off a little bit to try to make their numbers work better. So in one sense, just with the financial situation, you would think this would cause people to take at least a little bit of pause before giving the aid. But my guess is that Congress passes it or, gives whatever kind of rubber stamp or lack of condemnation, allowing the president to, maybe just give an executive approval or something like that. I think the danger here is it just, takes a situation in Ukraine which may slowly, very slowly be moving in the right direction and reverses it a little bit. You also have some political shakeup going on right now in Ukraine, and I'm sure no member of Congress understands the kind of political nuance and importance of what's going on. But as I described Zelensky as, a populist candidate, well, now all the rich oligarchs of the country, own different companies and have different political representatives that are bought and paid for. Well, he put a whole bunch of those people in his new cabinet after he dismissed his old one. So without understanding, the political dynamics of Ukraine, it seems completely foolish to send the aid. But once you do understand them, it seems potentially dangerous. And while I guess $125 million in patrol boats and radar won't be the catalyst for larger tensions breaking out in Ukraine, but U.S. support for the Ukrainian government could, and who knows, maybe they feel a little bit more reckless. We're getting more military support from the United States, so we feel comfortable that we could, advance our positions or, carry out more shelling, stuff like that, because we have the Americans at our backs. And we definitely shouldn't give that impression because Russia does back the separatists, the rebels in Ukraine, and the U.S. backing the Ukrainian government there could certainly, eventually mean the U.S. And Russia shooting each other. All right, so on to Afghanistan, where two men, the current president of Afghanistan, so the incumbent Ashraf Ghani, and his former chief executive, which was a position created in the Afghanistan government that was, I guess, somewhat comparable in power to his president, Abdullah, both claimed victory in the September elections, and then both just inaugurate themselves as president. I guess Ghani's inauguration had more international representation, and so it seems like if the U.S. is going to do business with anybody in Kabul, it's still going to be the Ghani government. And with all the money that the U.S. pours into Afghanistan, I have to imagine that's, as long as that's continuing, it's going to be enough to kind of keep him generally in charge of the country. I do think it's a destabilizing situation for Afghanistan with the peace deal going on. of when the Taliban start negotiating with the Abdullah government, or there are political factions and separations and stuff like that that form in Afghanistan. It's, trilateral talks are probably going to be even harder to negotiate than just talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government, who are bitter enemies. The point I did want to make there, though, was that rockets exploded outside of Ghani's swearing in. All right, so there's this complicating matter with the peace deal, and so far it seems to be the biggest fracture and potentially the cause of the ongoing violence in Afghanistan. The prisoner swap that was laid out within the peace deal, where the Afghan government was supposed to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners and the Taliban were supposed to release 1,000 other prisoners. However, the United States didn't clearly lay this out to the Afghan government, which wasn't actually a signatory to the deal in the first place. So imagine how complicated the situation here politically is in Afghanistan. But Ghani is now saying that he will sign a decree releasing the numbers have ranged between 1,000 and 1,800 Taliban prisoners who are old, have medical conditions, are nearing release. And I'm not sure how exactly the Taliban are going to respond to this, if this is enough to say, like, okay, we could kick off negotiations now and maybe try to have another ceasefires and reduction of violence paths directly with the Afghan government, or if they're going to say, we are promised near 5,000, 1,800, isn't even close. The U.S. is beginning its drawdown in Afghanistan. I think the first group of 100 troops are going to rotate out of Afghanistan. Nobody's going to rotate back in for them. Moving on to some news in Saudi Arabia that caught a lot of headlines. It looks like Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of the country, son of the king, had his cousin, Mohammed bin Nayef, arrested, as well as one of his father's younger brothers, so one of his uncles, but brother to the king, arrested and accused them of attempting a coup. As far as I know, Mohammed bin Salman has no desire or need to produce any public evidence if there was a coup or not. So who knows if this is just a power grab or if there was actually a coup fomenting against him. I read a couple articles on it, but honestly, nothing I feel comfortable saying enough on the show, as far as I think a lot of people are just guessing at what Mohammed bin Salman is doing. But as we've seen, the guy is something of a fool. He's landed himself in several quagmires that he can't get out of, like the GCC dispute with Qatar and the war in Yemen. And they've just absolutely blown up in his face. So it may be at this point that he's acting irrationally. Maybe he's paranoid with his policies not going well. He thinks people are out to get him. Or, they could have actually been plotting a coup against him because, he's seized an awful lot of power in the past 5 years. Saudi Arabia also made a lot of noise in the oil market when it announced it's going to hike production, I think for April. And this was over some kind of dispute with OPEC plus Russia about Saudi Arabia wanting production cuts, but it had a big impact on U.S. oil and I think especially fracking in like Texas. So that, along with the coronavirus, huge shakeup in not just the oil market, but the overall stock market. I'm not going to get into it on this show, but it is, just so interesting to me. I say this, it's interesting all the time, that the U.S. has such a dedication to Saudi Arabia as an ally, where they do these massive moves in the oil market, and it really messes with the U.S. economy. All right, Iran says it's planning to engage in talks with the IAEA about the report the IAEA released, saying that Iran had a couple issues in non-compliance with the nuclear deal, which is its surplus stock of enriched uranium, which it has because the U.S. has sanctioned Iran, so they can't actually export their enriched uranium at this point, although they may be stockpiling a little bit more of it anyways, just as the U.S. has violated its commitment to the deal by putting on sanctions like that one, and so Iran walked back its commitments to the deal, which included the cap on the amount of enriched uranium it was allowed to have. So my guess is Iran will make a similar point to the IAEA, saying it's unfair to call them out for violating these terms, as the United States has broken the agreement. The other issue the IAEA had was there was a site in Iran that is, according to the Iranian government, a carpet cleaning facility. and was already inspected, I believe, in mid-2019 by the IAEA and confirmed to have no nuclear material. And yet they're now looking to do another inspection of this site. I believe the point Iran is making here is that no new evidence has been offered and you already inspected it, so it seems redundant to do it again, and we're not going to allow it. Iran has temporarily released 70,000 prisoners due to the coronavirus. I thought this story was interesting just because of how much this virus is impacting Iran. And, I think it does raise a concern for me. Again, when, you're talking about the coronavirus and you're kind of thinking about yourself and your community, I'm not awfully worried that it's going to have a whole lot of impact. And, the place where I work, there's going to, after the coronavirus runs through us, only half of us are going to be left or something. I don't even, even if that's absurd. And it's like, I'm not worried about myself or any of my coworkers or other friends that I know, people my age. I don't feel like there should be a whole lot of concern. However, if you're a prisoner and you're already getting terrible health care in the United States and, just knowing how poorly prisoners are treated already, it does worry me about coronavirus breaking out there, and that could be fairly deadly. All right, so the situation with Turkey is we have U.S. Syrian envoy James Jeffrey, this guy's a hawk, saying that the U.S. is talking to its NATO allies about providing more support to Turkey. So that's negative to see because we don't want any NATO support to Turkey here. Turkey is essentially invading Syria. It is invading Syria. The other news we have is that Turkey is saying that the U.S. is going to be willing to sell Turkey U.S. Patriot missile defense systems or air defense systems if Turkey does not operate the S-400 air defense systems that were bought from Russia. So this has been a long unfolding story that I've covered from the early episodes of the show on. But to really oversimplify it, Turkey was considering buying either the Patriot missile system or the S-400 system from Russia. They end up going with the S-400 system, in part probably because of tensions. The U.S. was supporting the Kurds in Syria. Turkey was looking for recognition of their claims in the Eastern Mediterranean and some other political issues, and ends up electing to buy the S-400. The U.S. threatens sanctions. They say, we're going to kick you out of the F-35 program, out of the F-35 production line. You can't buy U.S. Patriot missile systems then. And it actually goes through with kicking Turkey out of the F-35 program, so they don't get to buy F-35 because their pilots who are training on them stopped training on them. And all the parts for the F-35 that were made in Turkey, the Pentagon is finding new places to make them. But now the situation for Turkey has changed quite a bit. It's not the U.S. backing the Kurds that they're so concerned about. It's Russia backing Assad. And Russia's not going to let Turkey use that S-400 air defense system on Russian planes and on Syrian planes. And so they're looking for a new way to control that airspace. And that would be the Patriot missile system. Now, I'm not sure if the, Turks could just slap a return to sender sticker on that S-400 and ship it back off to Russia and get their money back. If that means that they're going to have to take a bath on the billions of dollars they spent for those systems and just lock them up in some warehouse somewhere, it could get, I would say, probably pretty complicated. And my guess is that this sale doesn't end up going through. I think this would be one that would attract enough attention from Congress that it would probably receive a vote. And a lot of people within the U.S. Congress are fairly wary of Turkey, and especially their President Erdogan. I mean, his bodyguards beat a couple Kurdish protesters up in D.C. not that long ago. Selling the system or further backing Turkey by NATO, as James Jeffrey is pushing, are both terrible ideas. Just like in Ukraine, the problem here is that this is going to wind up with the U.S. in a conflict with Russia, which could mean nuclear war, world war. The ceasefire seems to be generally holding in Idlib, and so maybe the ceasefire will be long enough that tensions and the fervor among the American Hawks and their drastic need to take action in Syria dies down, so we don't end up selling these Patriot missiles to Turkey, who again just spurred the U.S., has issues with several of the other NATO member states, with the buying the S-400 system, leaving the F-35 project costing us hundreds of millions of dollars. Do we really want to sell them our weapons? Are those really the allies we're looking for? I mean, it just seems so crazy that we go along. In Iraq, 2 U.S. soldiers were killed in an anti-ISIS operation. Apparently, they were in some caves south of Iraqi Kurdistan when they were killed. The head of CENTCOM, I believe this is General McKenzie, says the U.S. is in the process of sending Patriot missile batteries to Iraq. The Iraqi government had previously said that they weren't going to allow this and were actually in the process of getting the Americans to leave, not send more equipment. And I have to wonder what impact the political turmoil in Iraq is having on the Americans' ability maybe to just ram this thing through. U.S. Marines have deployed to the Yemeni island of Socotra. It's out in the middle of the Gulf of Aden. It's known as, I believe, the Galapagos of the Indian Ocean. Has a whole bunch of, unique species and people that live there and everything. But the UAE has taken it over. I think they're looking to make it touristy, military, operate some ports there. And the U.S. is apparently backing this. We've deployed some Marines there with a Patriot missile battery. All right, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. Hope everybody's enjoying the show. Make sure you share it. Find it at the Libertarian Institute. I always post it on my Twitter feed at KYAAALE Facebook. There's a private Facebook group called Foreign Policy Focus. You get in there and talk with me. Patreon.com/Foreign Policy Focus.